Thank you. I love being in college, but I wasn't into the whole studying, going to lecture halls, or really anything that had to do with the whole education aspect of it. And my plan basically was to sign up for UConn's study abroad program in Normandy, because I figured I'd learn how to speak French while talking to girls in bars. But I ended up learning most of my French from the older couple in whose home I was placed. And during World War II, Robert had been taken by the Germans into a forced labor camp. And then Yvette had these stories of how they survived occupation. And all that year, I ended up getting the kind of education that you could never get in a lecture hall. And then my program went to Senegal. Now, we're mostly Americans here, so I think it's important for me to explain to you that Senegal is in Africa. And they speak French there. And Dakar, its capital, is the very western tip of the entire continent. And all while we were in Dakar, we had these minders that took us from place to place. And they said to us, don't leave the hotel by yourself. And so I left the hotel by myself. And I didn't get very far before this guy rushes over to me, and he's asking me my name. And before I can even answer, then there's two more guys. And before I can make sense of that, I'm just surrounded by a dozen guys. And there's this barrage of French and these skinny arms, and they're not trying to hurt me. These guys, they're go-getters. And they are asking me if I want drugs. They're asking me if I want women. They're going to get whatever they imagine that I want. And, I kind of got out of there and I got back to the hotel. And then all the while in Dakar, I had these minders. And I would try to stray a little bit. And these guys would keep coming up to me and often asking if I wanted marijuana. And I had hair down to here back then. And, they probably figured that I was more likely in the market for that than, term life insurance. And so all the while, in Dakar, it was just overwhelming. I had never seen poverty like that. I mean, there was just piles of rubble all over the place. And there were just so many people who just had nothing. And then one day, we rode a ferry to the Ile de Gorée. And because this is the westernmost point in Africa, the Ile de Gorée was a slave processing plant. And I walked through this corridor where thousands of human beings had been marched. And I stood at the end of it, and this is called the point of no return. And I'm standing there and just looking out at the waves, and just this icy chill just rockets through me as I'm forced to imagine just the utter inhumanity and trauma that went down right in that spot. And when we're back in Dakar, I saw these little kids, and they're playing in a pile of rubble, and there was just the stench of raw sewage. And, it was hard for me not to connect how once upon a time, we were all indifferent to slavery. And now we're indifferent to this. And I stepped off to the side to light a cigarette, and this guy comes up to me and asked if I would like de l'herbe. And this time I said, oui. And so he sold me these buds of marijuana that were wrapped in paper. And then, that night back at the hotel, we were just college kids getting stoned and trying to make sense of the world we were coming to understand. And the following morning, we took this crazy Mad Max journey all the way south, passing anthills that were 10 feet high, to this region called the Casamance. And our director had a connection with this remote village. And I could see, in this village, there was an intricate order to the place. There were, elders and a governing body, and the people there just looked so much better than they did in Dakar. But they did not have a lot. And one of the first things I noticed were the cows, because they were so scrawny. I mean, it looked like someone took a vacuum cleaner and like attached it to the cow's ass and just switched it on and like, and then I see they're growing vegetables in what looks like sand. And I asked the guy in the village, like, how do you, and he explained how they collect every piece of cow shit and they break it down, and that's how they fertilize their soil. And once I learned that, I could not throw my cigarette butts on the ground. And I began just twisting them out with my fingers and just shoving them into the side compartment of this fanny pack. And, you know, the best part about being in this village is that you could freely wander around. And one time I was finishing up a bottle of water, and this little kid comes up to me, and he smiles so sweetly at me because he wants that bottle. Because in this village, that bottle is a commodity. I mean, obviously, you could put another liquid in it. You could cut off the bottom and make it a funnel. And I saw where they sliced them up into strips and wove them into these sheets that became baskets and other things. And then I found out that the Peace Corps brought in these metal drums of concrete for them to build huts. And then the villagers, just all on their own, sliced up those drums and made roofing. And it was just wild, like walking around there. It was like being on acid. I mean, it's like you're looking at something, and then you see it used to be something else. And because it was just this whole village of MacGyvers, just jerry-rigging their survival, you know, with like scraps of metal and plastic and just things that we would consider garbage. And I was just so blown away by their ingenuity and their resourcefulness, and how with so little at their disposal, they took care of everyone. And so when we landed at the Aéroport Charles de Gaulle, and our flight had its own customs line, and I see in the distance there's this woman in a Navy uniform walking toward the line. And behind her are these two guys wearing these very official-looking white shirts. And she walks right up to me. And these guys flank me on either side. And she says to me, "Venez avec nous, s'il vous plaît, pour un contrôle des bagages." She is singling out me for a baggage check. And, you know, this woman who had like all of the charm of Nurse Ratched thinks that I look like the kind of guy who would try to smuggle contraband from Africa. And this woman was absolutely right, because I realized in that moment that I had somewhere on my person what was left of that marijuana. Because I knew two things. We didn't smoke it all, and I did not throw away perfectly good drugs. And so they lead me into this room, you know, on the other side of those one-way mirrors. And this woman pulls on this black latex glove with a snap. And I'm like, fuck, are they going to look there? But then she puts on another glove, and she asked me to put my backpack on this steel table. And so I do that, and she's having trouble with the zipper, and the zipper would always get stuck in the same way. And I'm like so out of my mind right now that like I actually reach over to help her, and she snaps, and she says, "Laissez-moi faire ma contrôle, s'il vous plaît," which roughly translated means, I live a life devoid of emotional intimacy. And she just starts going through everything. And when she takes the cap off of my little shaving cream to see if there's anything under the cap, I just start to sweat. And I am feeling just so stupid and so scared that I just fast forward straight to Midnight Express. And by the time she unzips the last compartment, in my crazy imagination, I'm already getting tortured in a Turkish prison. And so she goes through my entire bag, and it's not there. And I steel myself not to look down. But she asked for my fanny pack. And I kind of look over at her henchmen, and they're kind of glaring at me, kind of like, and, I unbuckle it and I hand it over. And she unzips the main compartment. She pulls everything out. It's not there. And she unzips one of the side compartments. She pulls out my cigarette lighter and a pack of gum. And then she unzips the other side. And she reaches in and she pulls out 2 of the cigarette butts that I didn't want to throw on the ground. And she looks at them. And she sets them down on the steel table. And she reaches back in. And this time she pulls out 2 more of the cigarette butts. And she smells them. And she looks at her henchmen, and they're like, and she looks back at me, and she says, "Qu'est-ce que c'est que ça? What is this?" And I'm just standing on razor blades, And I was like, "J'étais dans un village, et il y avait des vaches très maigres." And I'm telling her about the skinny cows. I'm telling her about the vegetables growing out of the sand. I didn't want to fucking litter. And she just cuts me off and says, "Ça suffit." And she takes the cigarette butts. She puts them back in the compartment and she zips it shut. And then she just kind of very nastily pushes it towards my bag. And she says to me, "You can go now." And I was like, I grabbed my bag. I got out of there. I went straight to the men's room, and I just unzipped that compartment. I pull all of the cigarette butts out, and I find in the very corner of that compartment, in the one spot where she gave up, was the marijuana. And I like to think that the universe was looking after me for not littering in that village. That was 28 years ago, and it's a much longer story how the kind of education that I did end up getting may not have helped me in the American workforce. I ended up renovating homes for myself in New York City, and then I moved on to a building in Brooklyn, and then to a 2-family house here in Beacon. And I fell into woodworking with my own construction debris. And so in my house, I took joists from the house that I demoed, and I bolted them together and made the collar ties. And all of my beds have been made from material that other people would just consider garbage. And I love whenever I just find everything that I need literally lying at my feet. And I want to close out by telling you how I once borrowed this Yukon Denali to go to the Home Depot and to get these mirrored sliding doors. And at checkout, I asked for some help. And so they call over this guy, and he's very tall and skinny, and he has very dark skin, and he speaks with an accent. And we load them in, and I just don't like how they're sitting on the seat rests. And he's looking at it, and I can tell he doesn't like the look of it either. And he says to me, "Wait one moment." And he goes off, and he comes back, and he's holding these strips of sheetrock. And these are the spacers that sheetrock gets delivered with. It's garbage. And he's also got 4 half-used rolls of paper towels. And he's clutching a handful of the Home Depot shopping bags. And he twists a bunch of the bags together into this strap that he hangs from the luggage racks. And he makes this sling with the strips of sheetrock. And then he takes the paper towel rolls and he places them along the points of contact. And he just engineered this ingenious just shock absorber just out of shit he found lying on the ground. And, but of course, I've seen this before. And I look at the name magic markered on his apron, and it's Moïse, which is the French form of Moses. And I thanked him. I gave him a tip. And I asked him, "D'où venez-vous? Where are you from?" And he smiled, and he said, "Côte d'Ivoire." And that's the Ivory Coast. And since we're mostly Americans, that's also in Africa. And, I just looked at him and I thought, your neighborhood or your village raised you well. And I like to think that that village back in the Casamaunts raised me a little bit too. Thank you.
Give it up for John Blesso.